Good morning, everyone. How many of you have been to Mosaic? I would have thought we had more hands up than that. How many of you don't like voting and so you didn't raise your hand? Yeah, there's a few of you. I went to Mosaic. I love Mosaic. I really love Mosaic. I don't know what happened. I went to the Italian pavilion. I walked in. There was a group of senior women who were serving food. They thought I was dying of hunger. But don't worry, they were there to fix it. They served me a plate of pasta. This is no exaggeration, that myself and my teenage son together could not find the bottom of. At 2 o'clock this morning, I was reflecting on that. At 3:30 this morning, I was looking up custom, you know the roof of your car, the fuzzy stuff? I was looking up custom ways of making those. At 4 o'clock this morning, I was praying for you. At 6 o'clock this morning, I got up and my wife said, "You were just snoring." And I thought, it's good to know I slept. So I can't do Mosaic anymore, not for a whole year. It was something else. And I don't know who those women were, but I love them. But we had leftovers. How many of you love a leftover meal? Go ahead, show me. Yeah, that's good, because this whole sermon wasn't going to go well if nobody voted that way. You know when you open your fridge and there is the really excellent food that was made a day or two before, and you bring it out, and you know some of that food tastes better the next day. You know what I mean? My grandpa used to make chili, and it was all day chili, and he had a big pot, and he would just feed the chili things all day. And then you'd eat the chili, but what you really wanted was the leftover chili. It had seasoned, and it was extra good. I have a file on my computer called Leftovers. And it's all the things that didn't make it into sermons or didn't make it, sometimes it's whole sermons that for whatever reason don't get preached. And I put them in this folder, and every once in a while I open that folder just to see what's in there, like you open the fridge. And sometimes what you find is that a sermon emerges thematically from all these little bits and pieces. And these bits and pieces come from all over the place. Sometimes Joel and I are talking. I'm often scribbling while he's talking, and God is bringing stuff to my attention. I just write down little ideas. Sometimes I'll see something on social media, and I'll copy it and put it in there, and there's a picture. Sometimes it's just things that come to me in prayer. Write it down, put it in there, have a look at it later. And so we're going to do a series, and it's somewhat a fragmented series. It is the series before the real series. The real series is going to be Songs of Summer, S-O-N-G-S, of summer. And so we're waiting for school to come to a close, and we are going to merge in with that series. But I suspect that there are some deeply nourishing leftovers. And so here's one. Today, we're going to talk about resilient faith. Now, when we talk about resilient faith, what we are actually talking about is resilient God and our faith in God. Because if we find ourselves where we lose faith, what we have ultimately said is we do not believe that God will be able to overcome whatever the situation is that we are facing. But the God that I worship does not bow at the feet of tension. He doesn't bow at the feet of problem. He doesn't even bow at the feet of possibility or time. He bows to no one and nothing. And this is the God that we have faith in, or we are called to have faith in. And so our desire needs to be to have resilient faith. Resilient faith is the sort of thing that when you see it, you recognize it and you remember it. Resilient faith is faith in times of certainty, but also times of mystery. Times when we don't know exactly what God is up to. In fact, resilient faith embraces mystery. I actually think this is a challenge for our culture right now, more than it has ever been, more than it was for my parents, or my grandparents, or anyone before us. And the reason why is because we really have the source of all kinds of answers really fast. You ever notice that? I was riding with a friend. We were going down Ring Road, and towards the city center, they were building, I don't know what it is. It's like a distribution building where trucks come, and it was a monster. And when they were building it, we were watching them dump endless amounts of cement in this thing. And I mused out loud, I wonder what they're building. And I reached for my phone to Google it, or to look on Just Bins and have them tell me. You know, it's about the same. And my friend looked at me and he said, Peter, do you remember when we used to wonder things? Yeah, I remember wondering. I remember going to my mom and dad and saying, hey, tell me about this. And they would say, go look it up in the encyclopedia, which I never, not once, ever did. And later on, people try to bring the encyclopedias completely unused to the church. And we say, thank you, no. And they say, but we spent thousands on it. And we say, we know. No, we don't want them. You can't leave them here. We had ways of looking it up, but we probably didn't. And we were okay with wondering. Do you remember wondering who was in your next year at school when you were in grade school? Who's going to be in my class? Maybe you moved to a new school. I wonder who my friend is going to be. I wonder what job I'm going to have. I wonder when so-and-so will come out with their next album. We wonder things. We just don't wonder very much anymore. And the problem with that is when we encounter something that we have to wonder about, it feels a little bit wrong. It feels a little bit like deceit because it sounds like someone is keeping some information from us. Don't they know who we are? We have access to all of the information. So sometimes when we ask God for something, when we wonder aloud to God and his answer is not certainty, our faith can wane. Our faith can become challenged. But remember, God never said, I will answer your questions as soon as you ask them. In fact, the Bible is packed full of God acting when God wanted to act, although people cried out in wonder. The book of Hebrews chapter 11, this is a really famous. If you went to Sunday school, you probably learned this one as a memory verse. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. We don't like that part. We like to know and to see. But if we know and we see, then we don't need faith. And what we're talking about is resilient faith. And so assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command. How? We have to figure it out. Somebody tell us. Tell us exactly how. Exactly. So that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is keeping with his faith. We often read the story of Noah, and if you really think about that, imagine your neighbor is building a boat. Like, hey neighbor, what are you up to? Building a boat? It's a pretty good boat there. That's a big boat. Where are you going? Well, I'm not going anywhere. It's coming. What's coming? Flood? How do you know? I believe. It's good. I'm glad you believe. You got to believe in something. Why is the boat so big? Putting animals on it. Why? Because everything else is going to die. Huh. Noah, we can't hang out anymore. It's a weird story. Enormous amounts of faith in that story. Maybe we don't like that story. Let's move on from that one. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went. Now, I'm okay going somewhere so long as you tell me where I'm going, what the itinerary is when I get there, how I'm going to pay for it, and, like, are you going to pay me for the wear and tear on my car? This is not free, you know. He obeyed and went, even though he didn't know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land, like a stranger in a forest in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God, anticipating that God would do what God said God would do. When God gave a promise, he believed it. He had faith, even though he didn't know how this was going to pan out. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who made the promise. She considered God faithful. And when he said she was going to get pregnant, that was the end of the conversation. She was going to get pregnant because God said so. And so from one man, as he was as good as dead, this is one of my favorite things in there. It means he was really old. He's as good as dead. That's a tough way to have a conversation with someone. Are we going to celebrate another one of your birthdays? I mean, this is getting a little old, don't you think? Makes you feel awkward, right? And so from this one man, and he was as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. That's faith. And all kinds of people came and said to them, the math don't work on this one, folks. I checked the encyclopedia. It's not going to work. And God said, my world, my science, my time. Yes, it is. And so we are called to have resilient faith in times of certainty and in times of mystery. But I think mystery challenges us a whole lot more. And yet, we're called to have resilient faith. We're also called to have resilient faith, or to be people of resilient faith who are hungry people. People who want something. People who have an idea of what they want God to give them. People who have something that they want to bring to God, and they want to bring it to God with a clear direction, saying, God, I want this. Very often, these are people who love others more than themselves. They are praying for someone else. Not that praying for yourself is wrong, it's not. Jesus prayed for himself. But when you love someone else and you are praying that God will reveal himself to that person, that God will heal that person, that God's activity will be evident in that person's life, oh, you get hungry. You get hungry. It's also people whose hearts are aligned with God's hearts. We're in a time right now where there is an entire nation that is cheering about the destruction of a person because that person was destructive to another person and then lied about it. And so there's a great cheer that goes up because we're going to get them. But if our hearts are aligned with God's heart, what we ask for is healing, 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 healing. Restoration, not division. The very reason Jesus died on the cross. Come to me, come to me, come to me. Let me heal. This is what Paul spoke about when Paul said, you think I'm bad, you don't know the half of it. If you really knew what went on in my mind, if you really knew the stories that you haven't heard, you think I'm bad now. Yet Jesus heals. And when you have a person that is comfortable in certainty, but also comfortable in mystery, and they are hungry for God's action, you have a person with great resilience. If you're hungry, you'll stand in the food line until you get fed. But if you're full, you'll walk right by it. We want to be people with resilience in faith. We need to be hungry. So here's a question. I want you to picture everything that you've ever prayed for is written down on a list. Some of those things have been answered. Some of those things you're continuing to pray for. And some of those things have fallen off the list. And the question is, what fell off the list? So I knew I was going to be preaching this. I thought I should probably figure it out for myself. And I thought about the different things that I used to pray for, that I no longer pray for, not because I got an answer, but because I sort of got tired of praying for them. And what I discovered was, when I gathered those things back up, put them back on the list, and offered them to God again, there was an answer in that, and the answer was Jesus himself. As Jesus lifted that burden, there are things I still ask God for. I am 30 years into asking them. I have talked with my wife about these so much that I no longer need to talk to her about them. She knows every part of it. I've exhausted the conversation. And I can forget to pray. And when you forget to pray about something, the weight pulls down on your shoulders. And if you leave it long enough, you just don't notice the weight until it gets lifted. When you offer your cares to God, when your heart is aligned with God's heart, and God's heart wants healing, God's heart wants unity, God's heart wants you and those you love and those you hate to be in relationship with him. And when you offer that up to God, he builds resilience in us, and he takes the weight. For some of you, you should get a pencil and a piece of paper and make a list. But what an amazing thing to stop and pray and say, God, what has fallen off my list? And then listen and put it back on and pray again with resilience. Have a request for God. Resilient faith continues even when God seems silent. I have a friend who will tell you that she is not a Christian. She sure talks a lot about this God she doesn't believe in. And she says to me, and sometimes she calls me Peter, and sometimes she calls me pastor. And when she calls me pastor, I know what kind of conversation we're going to have. And she once, in a moment of clarity, looked at me and said, how do you get God to do what you want? Oh my. God does not answer to me. God is not my vending machine. but God is my nourishment. God created me and sustains me. He created you and sustains you. He created this world and sustains the world. But what she wants is what she wants. And until God clicks his heels together and does what she wants, then she doesn't know if she believes in him. But here's the thing. In that scenario, who's God? I want to go back to the hungry one for a second. There's this book of the Bible. I love it. It's called Esther. Someday I'm going to do a whole series on Esther. We just finished this. You can watch them on YouTube. Okay. There is this verse in Esther, or this couple of verses, that describes hunger. Esther 4. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. That means don't eat. When it's time to eat, instead of eating, pray. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, day or night. And I and my assistants will fast as you do. And when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. I'm going to God because I'm hungry. And if it kills me, I will go to God because I'm hungry. It's like when your grandma prayed for you when you were not following God. It's like when your friend prayed for you when you didn't know that they were praying for you. It's like when the people around you who want to journey with you, who want to do life with you, but you can't be with them because they reek of health, and you can't be with them. Like when they pray for you. That's what hunger is. That's what hunger is. Now we have a story that this is one of the famous stories in Scripture. This is a story that sometimes makes us very uncomfortable because it is going to outline silence in a way that we can't quite get our head around. At least I can't. There's this guy, his name is Lazarus. He was from Bethany. And Bethany, in Bethany, there were 3 people, 2 sisters and a brother. And Jesus loved them. In fact, they were so close they were family, even though they weren't family. These were the people who, if Jesus was ever taking a break, he would go to them. These were the people that were so close to him. In fact, Mary was the one who poured perfume on Jesus' feet and mopped it up with her hair. That doesn't happen real often in my life. I have to imagine that there's a level of intimacy there that's pretty huge. So these sisters, they sent word to Jesus and they said to him, Lord, the one you love is sick. Now, this doesn't mean that Lazarus had the sniffles. They wouldn't send word to him about the sniffles. This means big sick. This means ugly sick. And in that message to him is a request. They know who he is. And so when he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Sounds good. Lazarus isn't going to die. Excellent news. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. That makes no sense. And then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. But Lazarus is in Bethany. And they've called for him. There's an interesting exchange that happens right after this where Jesus does some teaching and the disciples just don't get it at all. And after he said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." That's how you cure sickness. Ginger ale mixed with orange juice, Wheel of Fortune, and you sleep. And you're not allowed out of bed because if you're not going to school, you're not getting out of bed. And you can't go to youth group tonight either. That's how it worked for me. If he sleeps, he'll get better. Jesus had been speaking of Lazarus' death, but the disciples had thought he meant natural sleep. So he told them plainly, "All right, boys, listen. Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there so that you may believe, but let us go to him." Why? Why did you stay for 2 days? Why did you not go to Bethany? What is with this? Why are you silent? I don't think this is going to be a happy reunion, Jesus. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. This is a little gross. Let me go through this quickly. He has died. There has been some sort of ceremony, we believe. And then his body has been dressed with really aggressively scented stuff to mask the stench of decay. His body has been prepped, and he's been put in a tomb, and he's been in the tomb for 4 days. This is not a pretty picture. There is no question whether or not Lazarus is dead. Nobody. And anyone who asks the question hasn't really ever experienced it. Lazarus is dead. And so they go. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles away from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed home. There are elements of personality that come into play here that we find in other parts of the scripture. And what we know is that when Martha was coming to meet Jesus, she was coming all fire hurry, and she knew what she was going to say. There might be some really hard words. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you what you ask." Resilient faith. My brother's dead. I know he's dead. You know he's dead. Everybody knows he's dead. But I also know that you won't let that stop you. And if you ask God for this, he will give it to you. So Jesus, in the uncertainty, I am hungry. I want something from you, although you've been silent. Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection of the last day." Gentle caution. When people are grieving, let them grieve. Saying, everything has a reason. Saying, we will be together again. Oh, you're right. You are right. We can proof it. We can proof text it. You get your grade. But it's not kind. Be kind. Stand there and say, ouch. Oof. Grr. You can be right later. Go be right somewhere else. When you're with someone who's grieving, ouch. But there's something subtle here. The subtlety is Jesus is saying, I am the resurrection and the life. That very thing you seek for your brother, you want him back from the dead, you need to understand, I am that. And only Jesus can claim that. I am the resurrection and life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Do I believe it? Yes. Do I understand it? There's parts of it I'm a little foggy on. I maybe am not ready to write an exam on it yet, But do I believe it? Yes. After he had said this, she went and called her. I have to give you her response. Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah and the Son of God who has come into the world. Last week, Chris taught on the fourfold gospel. Do you remember what he said? Here's the fourfold gospel in a nutshell. Jesus is, Jesus is, Jesus is, and Jesus is. And so our request to God is, we need this, and his answer is, Jesus is. God, we want that, and his answer is, Jesus is. That's what's happening here. God, I want my brother to come back from the dead, and if you ask God, I know that he will do what you ask. And Jesus says, I am the resurrection. I am what you ask for. I am enough. It's profound. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been around Mary at the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. She got up in a hurry. She got up and went out the door real fast. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. Here's another subtle thing. The next sentence is, when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. And he asked, where have you laid him? Do not fall into the trap of trying to erase emotion when you pray to God. Do not try to center yourself, wipe your tears, blow your nose, mop your forehead, and then pray to God with just the perfect words. He was moved by her emotion. Do you remember in the book of Exodus when all of the Israelites are running from, or they're about to run from Egypt, and there's a conversation with Moses, and God says to Moses, I have heard the cry of my people. Not, I have heard the words of my people and found them to be properly structured with excellent punctuation, but the deep guttural cry. God hears your emotion. He created your emotion. Your emotion is moving to him, and he seeks it. He wants to hear it. And you can stand in front of God and you can yell. You can say, where were you when I prayed? You were silent, and now look where we are. Don't let your steering wheel hear more than your God. I promise God is stronger than your steering wheel, or perhaps your pillow at night, or your loved one, or the stars. Bring it all to God. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come alongside her weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? Come and see, they replied, and Jesus wept. That sounds like a caring God. That sounds like a God that is engaged and loving and knows who you are. The Jews said, see how they love him? But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? And then Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. You should read the rest of the story. It is an amazing story. And sometimes when God is silent, we need to allow God to deal with time. We need to let God deal with what is possible and what is impossible. And instead, we need to go to God hungry. And if God has to react, in a certain time, and he can't be silent, then the question becomes, who's actually God in this equation? And here's the last thing. Resilient faith chooses gratitude, and it has a pattern of thanksgiving. There is many psychological studies that all point to the same thing. If you are a person who is looking for reasons to be thankful, you will find them. Also, if you are a person who is looking for reasons to not be thankful, you will find them. It's funny to me that there's a whole study about that, because I could have told you that. If you look for things that are blue, you're going to find things that are blue. If you look for things that are tall, you're going to find things that are tall. And if you look for things to be thankful for, you will find them. Even if life is really hard. And we get into these patterns where we are either thankful people or we are grumpy people. And trying to get a grumpy people to be a thankful people, sometimes it feels like it's impossible. And you say, aren't you thankful for anything? Well, I mean, I guess, like, if you want to go like that, I'm thankful for like safety and food and heat and air conditioning and sun and that kind of stuff. But besides that, don't you know how hard my life is? Fair point. I want to read out of the book of Daniel. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule through the kingdom, and with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. It is Daniel's job to make sure no loss comes to the king. And go. Now Daniel so distinguished himself amongst the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. This sounds like a promotion, but with the promotion comes unbelievable responsibility, and sometimes that responsibility is impossible. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man, Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of God." And remember, in order to fulfill the law of God, all you have to do is be perfect. That's all. And if they can find any little thing, then he has sinned against God, and there's dire consequences then. So the administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, May King Darius live forever. That's a good way to start. He liked hearing that. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put this decree in writing. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and he prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he has done before. These men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. And that is where we get the story of Daniel in the lion's den. But the story is clear. Be thankful. Pray and give thanks. Find it up to and including when you are about to be thrown in a den of lions. Be thankful. Be thankful if your air conditioning breaks. Be thankful if there is division. Bring it to God and be thankful. Be thankful. Be thankful. Full stop. Period. Be thankful. If you want to be a person with resilient faith, be thankful. So long as you are focused on the stuff that you are not thankful for, and yes, there is plenty, then you are focused on the stuff you are not thankful for. But if you turn your eyes to God and you focus on what God is doing that you are thankful for, you will see more and more of it. And our focus comes in on Jesus and what he has done. And suddenly we stand before the communion table so thankful. Although our backs hurt from a load carried. And then we are thankful we get to offer that load to God. He says, I've got this. And you say, but I can't imagine how you're going to fix this. The problem is too deep. It's too hereditary. It's too generational. It's too sick. It's too dark. It's too secret. God says, not to me. I've got this. Be thankful. I've got this. But God, I'm in trouble. I'm scared. I've got this. I am the resurrection. Jesus is. Summer's coming, and I'm going to call the worship team to come up. In summer, we will tend to go on vacation, many of us. Here's something I know. At the end of vacation, sometimes it's hard to get people to come back to church because over vacation, for whatever reason, we decide not to go to church any longer. And our faith takes a hit. It's not because church gives you faith, but it's because this is the bride of Christ. And he is working inside of her to make her radiant and glorious. I want to invite you to continue to come. I want to invite you to have resilient faith. And I want to invite you to come dine at the table that God has prepared for us. Nourishment. This will make us strong. We find that on Sunday at the church, throughout the week in thankfulness, on our lists of things that we pray to God and trust in God, even in uncertainty. One of the things we can ask God for is resilient faith. And we should. So let's. We're going to sing together.
Because I'm hiding behind the piano. As we finish up our service today, I would encourage you to go and take a look at what has fallen off your prayer list. What were you hungry for that you stopped asking God for? And to be genuine and honest in your emotions when you talk to God. Our God is so much bigger than any of the emotions that we deal with. If you would like somebody to pray with you after the service today, please feel free to come to the front. We would love to be hungry with you as you ask God for things. We would love to be thankful for you for the work that God is doing in your life. So let me pray for you as we end our service. Dear God, thank you for this time we've had together today to worship you, to learn from you, to open our hearts, to hear from you. God, I ask that your Holy Spirit would continue the work that it has begun in our hearts this morning. God, would you make us hungry for more of you, hungry to see more of you in our lives and in the world around us. God, would you make us be thankful for the many blessings that you have given to us. God, I just ask that as we leave this place, we would resonate your glory, we would reflect your love. In Jesus' name, amen.